Welcome to Final Fantasy XI Math. Today, I'm updating my Empyrean Weapon Tier list because for the first time since I made my last Empyrean Weapon Tier list, the Empyrean Weapon Mats are back in the login points. Additionally, the login point system has changed a bit since last time, so I'll be going through that as well. Now, I would argue Empyrean weapons have probably changed in their uses more than most other weapons since I last made my tier list. So I think there's enough here to be worth doing an update. I'll start with my old tier list, which is currently on the screen, and we'll move things around from there, and then we will finally update the login point system at the end. And the new login point system is ultimately a fair amount better. So if you didn't enjoy the old system, you might like the new system a little bit more, although it's still ultimately just logging in a bunch of mules. So this is what I put together back in 2022, 4 years ago now. And the most controversial was probably the Great Axe, which I said probably should have been rated higher, but based on what I saw on paper, but I hadn't seen in person, so I had kept it a little bit lower just because I wanted to see it in person before I ranked it any higher. But having seen one since making the tier list, I would say, yeah, it probably should have been A tier. But the question is, where should they be now? So I'll just go through them based on the old order, and then we will see what the new order is. So starting with the Harp. Now, I think this is a good one to start with just because it brings up the elephant in the room here, which is, what do we do about the primes, right? The stage 5 horn pretty much just replaces this. In order to get that stage 5, if you want to go on Bard, you need this until you have that. It is such a dramatic difference having one more song or not. So then the question is, how do we rate it, right? Because normally S tier before would be it's like the best there is, and if there's something better, do we knock it down to A tier? But if I do that, there basically just won't be an S tier because for the most part, there's going to be a stage 5 prime that's going to beat most of these, pretty much any situation. So I think what we'll say is, for the purpose of this tier list, S tier does not mean it's like the best ever. It just means it's the best there is unless you've got the prime. The primes take significantly longer to make. You can't just solo them. Well, I mean, you can, but have fun with that. Well, and even then, you're not gonna beat Amanon on your own. I don't think anyone's close to doing that solo. We'll keep it S tier, but with the understanding that, yeah, stage 5 prime is better, and that's just kind of gonna be the case for all of these. Like, yeah, if you have the stage 5 prime, yes, probably better. We'll try to point out situations where the prime maybe isn't the best. Certain primes just aren't that great, but for the most part, they're all pretty darn good. So we'll leave that S tier. Okay, great sword. This is still Dark Knight's weapon of choice, short of the primes. Dark Knight does have 2 really good prime weapons, but their primes aren't even that much better than this. Like, this is competitive. It's really good. Torque Cleaver has benefited from the increase in the amount of weapon skill damage gear available. Dark Knight is one of the jobs that benefits most from the new Hoxne amulet. Yeah, it's really good. And the Hoxne also starts to make resolution a bit more of a viable weapon skill, which then makes this build a lot better in terms of helping you with a weapon skill wall. So there's a lot going on here that's pretty good with new gear and additions to this. So I think it stays S tier. I think it's really good. Great Katana. Again, this is still the samurai weapon of choice, short of having the prime, but their prime is very good. Budo also has benefited greatly from increase in weapon skill damage gear. Sam is a little less excited about Hoxne since that would cost them their Zanshin. There's probably some builds that are worth doing with Hoxne, but then it's, you want to pay that extra gil for probably a rather small benefit. Additionally, their weapon skills don't really benefit from Hoxne. Less of a big deal for them. The Aeonic is also sometimes still slightly preferred over this for certain situations, such as hybrids. But I think this is still so widely used that I think S tier is fair for it. Dagger. The debate on this was basically that since this was the primary weapon for Thief and Dancer, and they just weren't considered very good back when I made this, so some people thought I shouldn't have made this S tier since the jobs that use it aren't that good. But since then, Dancer has become a bit more meta, and really, which it always should have been. And this is still the go-to weapon for them in most situations. Now, Dancer has a lot of good weapons to choose from, but this is definitely one of their top chosen ones. Rujo's benefits greatly from the additional weapon skill damage gear we've gotten, so that's good. And Hoxney, well, these aren't really jobs I immediately think of using Hoxney for. It's actually pretty solid for both. It's pretty good. And not only does it improve their TP, but Evisceration, which they use to set up a lot of their skill chains, benefits a lot from Hoxney as well. So yeah, I think S tier is fine for the Dagger here as well. The shield. Now the shield got replaced by the Stage 2 Prime, which you can make in a single afternoon. It's much easier to make than O-Chain. Stage 2 Prime has more defense, more shield skill, same size. It does consume your soul, which costs you 1 MP and HP per tick, but it wakes you up when it does that, so it's not a complete loss on that. Now the Prime can then additionally be upgraded to get rid of the consume your soul and gain some MDT2. Eventually it gets to the point where it's effectively half an Aegis on top of an O-Chain. You don't need all that to replace the O-Chain. Just the Stage 2 is pretty much always better than the O-Chain. So seeing as it's been replaced by something that's easier to get and is better in almost all situations, we're definitely going to be downgrading the O-Chain. Now, is there anything that the O-Chain still has going for it? Well, it does have one thing, which it gives you MP back based on the damage that comes through after a shield block. So problem there, of course, is usually you shield block and then you take 0 damage, so then it's not giving you any MP. But there is one case where that's definitely not the case, which is Limbus NMs do full damage through shield blocks. So this should be giving you a ton of MP for the Limbus NMs. I don't know that that really helps you a whole lot, but that is something it does. Now, I still think that's probably a glitch. Maybe they'll fix that at some point and then that won't matter. And that's still such a niche thing. Yeah, I think it's got to go all the way down to D tier. It's just been pretty thoroughly replaced. I wouldn't recommend anyone ever making it anymore. Okay, hand to hand. Now, the God Hands and sometimes the Prime are pretty much the go-to weapons for Monk. But the Empyrean is not far behind God Hands. They're pretty competitive, and it's actually better for certain skill chains as well as for white damage purposes. And it's so competitive, I think A tier is probably still fine for it. It's just that a lot of the situations where we use Monk tend to be ones that favor the God Hands, but there's plenty of other situations where you want this, so A tier is fine. The gun. Now, the Prime Bow has become the premier physical ranged weapon for Ranger. But again, we're not holding primes that much against the weapons for this tier list. And there's actually some advantages here because the white damage builds of the Empyrean ranged weapons actually allow Ranger to manage their hate far more than what you can do with the Prime Bow. In addition, the gun here gives you the best wildfire damage, which, sometimes you just need fire damage. And it's a reasonable backup option for True Flight or Leaden if you're lacking the Mythic, depending which job you're on. And it's still your best ranged physical option short of the Prime. So, yeah, I think A tier is fine. Great Axe. So this probably should have been A tier last time. It's used for a very strong white damage build on Warrior. And white damage builds have become more appealing to help deal with the weapon skill wall. People needed builds besides just Nagling, and this was certainly one of the go-tos until people had their primes going. Great Axe also provides some great utility. That said, over in Odyssey Jail, you run into some problems because without Hasso, the Empyrean Axe is arguably better than the Great Axe, which I'll get to when I get to ranking that. Warrior, of course, also gets some of the least out of Hoxney. But still, overall, I think given the increased use of white damage, and that this is still a really good white damage build, we can go A tier with it. Okay, Scythe. So this I feel like has been a bit of an overlooked weapon because Scythes have the highest base PDL, and base PDL is important because that gets multiplied by all your other PDL. And this allows it to actually have significantly higher white damage than the Greatsword does. Now it still falls behind because Torque Cleaver is so strong and has continued to scale better with the weapon skill damage gear. But especially with the addition of Hoxney and the increased desire for white damage builds these days, this thing with Hoxney is just a white damage machine. The Greatsword remains all around better, and as it benefits similarly from the Hoxney and got better weapon skills with it still. But when you want your highest possible white damage, this is it. This is now not just Dark Knight's best white damage build, but it's now one of the best in the game. So given that, I mean, it's still worse than the Greatsword, but I think it moves up to A tier. Yeah, it's surprisingly good. Okay, Polearm. This remains a solid weapon. It is Dragoon's best white damage, but with our weapon skill damage traits, it's not really playing into our strengths. I mean, we do get a decent amount of double attack and crit and stuff, but it's not really the direction we're generally leaning towards. We got one of the better primes, and it's really hard to beat. But short of that, we're otherwise usually leaning towards either the Aeonic or Shining One or Nagling. But you'll note those options either don't skill chain very well or they're focused on darkness skill chains, whereas this is focused on light. And this is a better white damage build, which does have some uses. In addition to the usual like Kutrib fights and such, another big use of white damage on Dragoon specifically is sometimes we just need to use leg sweeps to keep a fight under control. And if you're using your TP for that, well, you can just get your AM3 up and then let your white damage do the job the rest of the time while you're busy leg sweeping. All right, like there's some legitimate uses here. And I think it's still just a solid weapon. I think B tier is perfectly fair for it. Okay, the club. This is for removing Doom. It's very good at that. That said, since I invested in a Holy Water set for soloing Shinru, I've never really had to worry about Doom. In addition, with master levels, people just have better removal of Doom already anyways. So, while it's a nice pickup for a career white mage, it's not really like a requirement for anything these days. I think C tier is perfectly fair for it. Okay, the axe. So I mentioned earlier, without Hasso, this can achieve less, but comparable white damage to the Great Axe. Obviously, you're hitting less for each swing, but you're swinging faster. But you get both Calamity and Mistral Axe as physical weapon skills, which have both scaled very well with weapon skill damage. They're kind of like weaker Savage Blades. But notably, you have two of them, which makes it very good for dealing with the weapon skill wall. Still, a lot of the time you do have access to Hasso, so that is a little bit niche. But you do have a few other uses here. It is, of course, also your best Cloud Splitter weapon, which gives it a fair amount of utility. But you do get the slight downside of you do have to use Cloud Splitter to do your AM3, which can potentially be a small liability in certain fights. Still, overall, the fact that it is sometimes better than the Great Axe, yeah, I think I'll go all the way up to A tier on that. That might be a little aggressive, maybe it should be B, but let's go A. Let's just go for it. Okay, the bow. So the deal with this is the Empyrean gun can be used in basically all the same situations, and it is generally better. Except the bow's true shot range is just out of range of AoEs on a decent amount of fights. So if you can safely be in true shot range with the bow, but you can't with the gun, because the gun has a much shorter range true shot range, then the bow with the true shot range bonus can beat the gun. Now the prime bow, of course, beats them both, but as I mentioned with the gun, the Empyrean white damage builds have a few more tricks to managing their hate, and so remain relevant. Now I think I've probably used the bow about as much as the gun, although there certainly have been times when I tried using the bow only to find out, oh, those AoEs are just a little bit longer range than I thought they would be. So I'd say the gun is still overall better. It's more flexible. You will use it in more situations, or at least you should be using it in more situations. But I do enjoy the bow, and it can be better in a decent number of situations. I think I'll move it up to B tier. Okay, the Katana. Now this is Ninja's best white damage. Like basically all the Empyrean weapons, they're the best white damage options. But that is hardly the strength of Ninja. I guess I'll note Ninja did finally get another agility-based weapon skill, so you could offhand this to boost it, but it's your prime weapon skill, which only has a 25% stat mod for agility. Really doesn't seem worth it, and it is not a popular prime. Now, there are some niche uses here. Obviously, one of the ambuscades people think about using Ninja on the most is the Kutrib one, and this is a really nice weapon to have for that fight, but I struggle to find other uses for it, so I think C tier is fair. Okay, the sword. Problem here is you're directly competing with Nagling. And for the jobs that can use this, they probably, even when they're doing C2C, probably still prefer Nagling's attack bonus. So it's in a really tough spot. If you're trying to do white damage on Red Mage, the SU5 with end spell builds will almost always just way outshine this. Now, I mean, this does physical instead of some kind of element, but these are not, neither blue nor red mage is really looking at like great physical white damage builds. Even with this, it's just not going to do much for you. And you give up so much weapon skill damage by not using Nagling instead, or Tizona on blue. I think it's staying in D tier. Okay, and finally the staff. Now, it's an interesting lock style. If I'm using a staff on those jobs, I don't like swapping weapons. Obviously, it boosts Merker, which is part of why I don't like switching weapons on those jobs. But, like, I don't want to be casting in this because it's not giving me any MAB. Pretty much the only spell that this is somewhat appealing for is Death, just because it has so much MP. And then you can Merker back your MP, and you got all the fast casts, so you're getting a lower recast time on Death. But do I really need to be in casting Death only mode very often these days? No, not at all. And I don't need this to be effective when I am casting Death. So yeah, I don't see it. Like, I can cap my fast cast without this. Okay, so overall, everything pretty much stayed the same or moved up, other than the shield. But with the understanding that stage 4 or 5 primes often beat pretty much all of these. So you could argue that all of these should be like down one additional tier just because of that. But if everything's down a tier, is that really a difference? So we're going with this. Okay, now to discuss the login point system and how it changed. So you no longer get 500 points on the first day and then 100 afterwards. Now it's 50 points for each of the first 14 logins, and then 500 on the 15th. Although this month they made it 700. And then 100 for each day after the 15th. This means we can no longer game the system by deleting mules after they spend their points to get extra 500 days. So you may think that means we'll be getting a lot less. But the thing is that they have the price on the Empyrean weapon mats. So they're only 500 points now instead of 1,000. Now, the campaign starts on the 14th, so day 15 would be the 28th if you don't miss any, at which point you'll have 14 times 50 points for 700 points, plus 700 for the day 15, plus the carryover is now only 700 points. So that adds up to 2,100 points total if you've pre-charged your mules and you didn't miss any days. And then there's 4 additional days, because there's also the first, which is the next month. And each of those will be 100 points. So that brings us up to 2,500 total points for the month. And since it's 500 points per item, that's 5 items per character if you've done everything right. And you need 50 total to completely skip a particular NM. But you may also have some extra from Vanabout or other things. So figure out how many mules you need to fire up for the month, and you're good to go. I recommend focusing on skipping Glavoid or Chloris. Personally, I don't think I would pay for extra mules for anything other than Glavoid or Chloris, as those two, I believe, are by far the worst. and I'm not interested in debating which is worse between them. The worst is simply whichever of the two I'm currently doing. You can, of course, use your points for others if you want, but logging in a bunch of mules every day isn't exactly the most fun thing either. I really would try to focus on the most annoying ones. As such, the weapons I recommend focusing on are the Dagger, the Hand-to-Hand, the Great Axe, the Scythe, or the Polearm, as those are the ones that require Glavoid or Chloris. Anyways, hope this helps. I wasn't really planning to update the tier list yet, but these are my most watched videos, and I don't want people to miss out on the login point campaign if they want it. See you next time.